What do you want your legacy to be?
I think my legacy, I would love for it to be these young people continuing on with this work. My hope is that, anywhere I've been, to be able to work with a team, because it's not just me, it's an entire community. We can't always see the end result, but that there's a lot of young people out there that are just going to keep passing it forward and keep working hard and keep the journey and the social justice issues alive. So I think for me, you won't ever see your legacy, right? Because I think it's within these young people.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart and Hustle podcast. Now, I'm incredibly excited to sit across the table from this amazing leader, where we're going to be talking about the importance of investing into the next generation, building up the confidence of our youth. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that we face in this space, but also the importance of inspiring the next generation. And for this conversation, I have Rachael Gazdick here with me today. Rachael, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited because today's conversation, we're going to talk about not only you being the CEO of New York Edge, but we're also going to be talking about addressing the mental health and building community in younger generations. We're going to talk about rethinking the role of after-school programs in modern education and so much more. But before we kind of dive into that and we talk about your amazing work at New York Edge, I want to ask the question, why do you do this work? Why is it so important to you?
It's so important to me because I believe in our students, and I believe in that they're the next generation. I believe in their intellect, their passions, and I think it's our job as educators to ignite their intellectual curiosity and bring the world to them. And I think that's a really important, it's just critical for us as adults to say, look, we got to bring our kids, particularly in the neighborhoods that I've been a part of over the years in underserved neighborhoods, is that I see the best and the brightest in our children, and I think they deserve the same opportunities to excel.
Why is curiosity something that is so important? I feel like you intentionally use that word there.
I do, because I think to have curiosity means that you're constantly growing and learning and thinking about the world around you. And I also think that when we think about careers, they're generative, right? So we're creating new ideas, new innovations, new ways of thinking. And I think we have to prepare our kids to exist in that world, right? And so that they can also be their own boss. They can create their own business, their own websites. I mean, I think the world is much more wider than it was even when I was a kid, because you would tell somebody to be a, doctor, teacher, lawyer, or, whatever the case may be. But there's so much creative energy out there. And so I really want kids to be curious and to think really deeply about what they want to do and how they want to do it. And I think we can play a great role in that at New York Edge.
I think about the sense of curiosity and how it has to continue to evolve and adapt. One thing that I know about this younger generation, as they went through the pandemic and things like that, is they were forced to develop the skill set of adaptability. When I think about how the landscape of just professional work has completely changed, influencers, being able to work in spaces like AI, these weren't even things that I even had on my radar when I was coming up and thinking about my career path. But the way in which society moves so quickly today, it seems like there are so many things on the other side of the horizon that we can't even anticipate yet. So how are you thinking about the ever evolving space of the job market and how people can apply themselves to make a living for themselves?
Yeah, I think what's really important is for us to be on the cutting edge and not on the back edge, right? So I think a lot of times, we in our industry get technologies later, we get older machines or whatever the case may be. And so I'm a very strong advocate for our kids to have the best tools, the best resources up front, and not sort of be in this space where our kids don't have access to the things that they need to really become the next generation of innovators and educators and social entrepreneurs, whatever it is that they think about. And so I think when we do coding, or we're doing, we do that with kindergartners, right? So it's like the coding language. I've sat in rooms where kindergartners are coding. Now they might be coding they might be coding, doing the language to get their name to like move. But they can see that writing the script on the back end, or writing the code on the back end, how that works, right? And how that comes to life. So that if our kids see this as second nature, as things evolve and they get older and they become more curious, I think all our kids also will know what coding is, how all these things operate, so on and so forth, robotics, solving problems, in our STEM programs. But I think it's exciting to watch these little guys do things that most adults can't do. Yeah.
I know that you had a couple experiences early in your career that kind of shaped and pushed you down this path. One of which is, I know that you went to Syracuse. I also know that you spent some time down in Louisiana, I believe it was, working with some smaller communities. What was that like? And how did that kind of evolve into being part of your journey?
Yeah, so I was a Teach for America Corps member, and that was when Teach for America was in its third year. And so I trained for the Corps in South Central Los Angeles, actually, to start with in the summer. And then my placement was in Southwest Louisiana, in a small town called Lake Arthur. If you ever see the film Passion Fish, it's an old film, and it was filmed in Lake Arthur.
That must have been a big adjustment from South Central to Southwest Louisiana.
And it was interesting at that time, unlike today, I think folks really would say, oh, I want to be placed in an urban community. I want to be placed in New York City, or I want to be placed in Washington, D.C. right out of college. And so I took the approach that I just want to be placed where the greatest need is. And so I actually didn't specify where to place, where I wanted to be placed. So Southwest Louisiana. And I think in our rural school communities, they don't get as much attention also as major urban communities. And so there's still very much pressing issues and things that need to be addressed. But I did live on the bayou in a small town with great people, and really saw the sense of community within their schools and how people come together to support each other, and learned a very different way of life in the U.S. And to this day, I still have friends and folks down there that I know and keep up with. I learned how to pull crawfish traps, herd cattle, make sausage. One time I went on an alligator hunt. So it wasn't just the teaching, it was what is life like in Louisiana. So our principal, a good friend of ours, said, you Yankees aren't going to sit there and read the New York Times and eat bagels. I'm going to show you what it's like to live on the farm and be out here. So I think that's an important context, and it's an important way of thinking about, the differences across our country. And so I have had the opportunity to live in the South and the Midwest, here in New York City, and so it was interesting.
I mean, the biggest adjustment, Syracuse, South Central, Southwest Louisiana, right? One of the biggest things that I recognized, I moved from Detroit, Michigan to Conway, South Carolina, right outside of Myrtle Beach. And you said something that just made me go down a path of memory, which was the word Yankee. For the first time in my life, when I went to the South, someone said, "You Yankees from the North." And I was like, wait, are we talking about the Civil War here? This is really interesting. But I also love the fact that they were rooted in so much culture down in the South, and especially being in those smaller communities. What were some of the conversations that you were having with yourself when you go to Southwest Louisiana? You're living in a completely different world, basically. What are some of the conversations you have with yourself about adapting to this new culture and fitting in with the way of the South that you weren't doing before?
Well, and you just sparked something for me. So yeah, we used to get called Yankees, and too many Yankees in a room, there's, going to be a revolution or something. And I'll tell you that when I left this is just a side story. I walked all around New York City. I was back here before I was going back for my final 2 years. And I searched every store in New York City for a hat that actually said Yankees. And it's very difficult to find. You can only find the emblem. But I finally found one in Port Authority, so I could hand them out as my parting gift down in Southwest Louisiana. I think when you're 22 and you really are in that frame, I want to make a difference and I want to see things change for kids and I want to do everything I possibly can. I think from my experience in Syracuse, I was very actively involved in adult literacy. And so particularly for kids to read, I wanted to have a big impact on that at an early age, because the adult learners that I used to work with are probably some of the smartest people that I've ever known. Because if you imagine not being able to read for most of your life, you have to be highly intelligent to sort of navigate the world and be able to figure things out in your own life, right? And so I was teaching, folks that were in their 40s and 50s how to read, and had just wonderful relationships and learned a lot from them. And so I think in the school setting, I really want to see kids not only know how to read, but understand the joy of reading and the joy of thinking and the escapism, which I think is harder today with social media and other things, of getting, people to sit and enjoy a book, enjoy the story. And so I think reading is really critical. I'm living in the rural South. It was a big transition from being in a college life to being in Southwest Louisiana. And we were also very fortunate, the core members down there, that people embraced us. But I do have, I remember going into a store one time. It was just this little, and I didn't want gravy on my rice. Mm-hmm. And the lady said, I haven't done that ever. Like, I've worked here for 40 years and nobody. And I thought, oh my gosh, so from that point on, I got gravy on my rice, or I would check out and they would say, your mama's not going to want to cook with those mushrooms. And in my head, I'm like, my mom's like thousands of miles away. But there's this sense of like, this is the culture and be a part of it. But they didn't know who I was. And when I came back, they said, oh, you're that Yankee school teacher. So I'm not joking when I say I got called the Yankee school teacher a lot. But it was a term of endearment, I hope. Yeah.
I mean, integrating yourself into a community like that is really interesting to me, but also the element of intelligence is kind of how I want to frame this, right? People who often don't have educational experiences, can't read at the age of 40, 50, become incredibly smart when it comes to like emotional literacy. And I feel like the more leaders who I speak to, specifically in the education spaces, are talking about the importance of these soft skills in navigating the world. When you think about all the technology that's kind of thrust into the world, especially for the younger demographic today, where information is readily available to them and often thrust into their face, what do you think the importance is on those soft skills, the emotional intelligence, as they navigate the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at New York Edge, we do a lot around social emotional learning and around different things that will build kids' identities, whether it's self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, their relationship skills, social awareness. I think that's a really critical part of social emotional learning, and really understanding where kids are coming from, and also understanding, I think you have to understand their worlds and how they operate in those worlds, and not sort of negate it. And so I think that's really important. I think AI has an interesting future for kids in a wide range of ways. I think kids with disabilities could really benefit from the tools with AI. So, for example, maybe they're not as strong in writing, but they are verbally, functioning at a very high level, that they can communicate in ways and write papers and do things in ways that they've never been able to do before. I think for all kids, and I think it's harder for adults to adjust to these tools. than it is for our young people. I also see in our communities, and I've brought this up so often with mental health, is that, for the 30 years I've been doing this, it's often that we have multiple languages spoken in our schools, and when I say multiple, I'm saying, like 20, 30 different languages. And now with the technology, and I can talk into a device, and then it can, put it in any language that you'd like, so the person on the other end can understand what you're saying, and vice versa. We always say with mental health providers, we don't have enough like Spanish speaking mental health providers, or we don't have enough, whatever language the children need. And so it's not enough to just stop there, because that's how the conversation ends. We don't have enough. So I think we have to really utilize these tools in multiple ways in learning and in reaching kids and their families. I tried, my grandmother was Slovakian, so I tried, and she used to speak Slovak with my great grandmother. And I thought, she was still with us. I typed something in and it totally wrote it out in Slovak. But she used to get these letters from, Slovakia, and have the neighbor down the street translate them.
Wow.
And so imagine now I could take her letters and I could put them in AI and they would translate them for her in English. So I just think the possibilities are endless.
And that's where I think we have to come at these technologies from, is a lens of curiosity, but also a lens of abundance, right? This technology today is so good. Speaking 30 different languages is no problem for artificial intelligence. Very easy. But how do we integrate that into our lives to be able to create a better sense of connection? One of the things that I often worry about very transparently, Rachael, is the next generation that's coming up right now has often been perceived as one of the least resilient generations. And one of the common conversations that I often talk about in the podcast is resilience often comes through exposure to our seniors in our communities who can tell us stories about things that they've overcome. And when we have a disconnected, isolated type of community in society, I worry that those oral stories of resiliency and overcoming hardship aren't being passed along. And maybe artificial intelligence will help us get there, but I think we need to come together more often rather than being so divisive and separated and isolated. But a large part of that is due to the technology that we integrate with and interact with every single day too.
Yeah, and I also think that's where the power of after school comes in too, because I think the kids are connected to our staff members as mentors and have that face-to-face interaction. And it's a very different relationship than you have with your teachers or the principal. And so we do a lot of community building and leadership building in that space. Because typically school districts have, their assigned curriculum and the goals that they have to achieve. So I think in the out of school time space, we're really allowed to, dig a little deeper and work with kids. Because I agree with you. I think this disconnect from social, I've been in rooms with teenagers and they're not talking to each other. They're just texting each other while they're sitting in the room. And we actually don't engage in that during our after school program. Like they can't use their phones and they have to be disconnected unless it's, of course, something that we're working on, right, that requires it. And I think increasingly we're just trying, and I think as adults, when we put our phones away, our brains operate differently too. And we don't really miss it too much, I don't think. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the term called alone together?
Yes.
Yeah. So everybody in a social environment, alone, but together. And that's something I truly worry about. Here's another question for you. Have you ever been to a show, a event where you go into the auditorium, into the center, and they have you put your phone in a bag? Have you ever seen that before?
I have.
I saw Keenan Hart one time where we went into the stadium and everybody had their phone in a bag. First of all, people started freaking out because they're like, wait, what am I supposed to do? But instantly when people sat down, instead of looking on their own devices, what did they do? They turned to each other. They started having conversations with the person in front of them and behind them. And it was magical. And it reminded me of a before time. And that was when I realized I started getting a little bit older. Was I remember when we used to go to events and nobody had a phone and people would just talk to each other. That sense of community is something that I feel like we're yearning for more so today than ever. But sometimes it takes a Kevlar bag to separate us from our device mandatorily, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and I had that same reaction when I went to a concert and had the same experience. And also, I try not to video things because I'm watching it. Like, you need to sit and enjoy the show or enjoy the comedian or whatever the case may be. And I think that's important.
I want to talk a little bit about Nelson Mandela. You were inspired by Nelson Mandela at some point in time during your career. Can you share with the audience what that was like and what you left inspired with based on the messaging of the experience?
Yeah, when I was in graduate school at Harvard University, President Mandela made his last visit to the U.S. And the university dressed Harvard Yard like a special commencement. And they've only done that for, I believe, George Washington and Winston Churchill. And so that shows you how powerful a moment was. And so the crowd filled Harvard Yard, and President Mandela came up on the stage, and you could have heard a pin drop within the audience. It was just this absolute silence. And one of the things that he said, I'm paraphrasing, is like, I've grown old. I'm going to rest and go up into the hills now. And now it's your responsibility, the next generation's responsibility, to take on the challenges of the world. And I think that really resonated with me. I think anytime I hear an inspirational speaker or, Kamala Harris's most recent concession speech, or, the Obamas, whoever is speaking, to remind us that it's all of our collective responsibilities to create the change that we want to see in the world. And so that was, one of many defining moments, in my life, or people I've heard. But I think just the power, his history, it was just very moving, an experience. I always say it was worth, if I only did that, that was fine for my whole tuition at the university, right? Like, that was enough.
A great return on the investment.
Yeah. I think all the, you go to class and you do the things in school and you have these phenomenal faculty, and that's true. And then, but also who comes on these campuses, and any place, Syracuse, Harvard, wherever, I think is important for the younger generation and college students, and, to be exposed to these folks. And so I think that's what higher ed institutions do. And I think it's phenomenal. Yeah.
Was it the global impact of Nelson Mandela, or was it the intimacy that you got in just hearing him speak individually in that moment that was so inspiring to you? I'm trying to tap into that mindset of Rachael while you were there and why you were so inspired.
Yeah, I think it's the global impact. I think it's coming out of incarceration and still, accepting things on behalf of South Africa, that there wasn't, I'm sure there was, how do you psychologically in those moments continue the work that you're doing, and what keeps you going? And so I think, there's times that are challenging in all of our lives when we do this kind of work. And so to think about how he transcended all of that in ways that, talk to a nation, but talk to the entire world, really resonates. Because I think you have to find something, or read something, or find something within that keeps you going. Because the issues and the challenges and things that we face are not easy on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Do you believe in fate?
I do believe in fate. Yeah. And I've had some interesting moments around that. Yeah.
I was listening to a conversation yesterday with Matthew McConaughey, right? The famous actor. And he was on a podcast, and he was talking about an interesting concept, which really kind of impacted me. And it was the way in which we live our lives. We think everything is random, right? And only with the perspective of time can we see how everything seems to be interconnected. that how we show up at the coffee shop a couple minutes early and we meet somebody, how we choose to go to a specific school, then Nelson Mandela ends up coming and inspiring us and talking to us in a certain way that causes us to change the trajectory of what we pursue. I'm really interested in thinking about the macro picture of it all and how it's all kind of connected. And it seems like your experience, not only at Syracuse, but Boston College and now Harvard, but also South Central and Southwest Louisiana, is all connected to kind of bring you to the place where you're in today to be able to impact this next generation, because it's so important, specifically at this point in time in society.
Yeah, and I think, I think the writings of Dr. King, I think the writings of Maya Angelou, I think there's people that also that you read and think or go see about, that when you need that boost or that lift to keep going. I think that's just an important part of the journey as well. And so, and in speaking about like fate, I remember very clearly in Syracuse, I was about to go up on campus. I don't remember what the issue was exactly, but there was a homeless man who, I used to speak with, or he walked up, I'd say hello and that would be it. And it was a really bad day for whatever reason. And he said, "Oh, don't you worry. You're doing the right work." I just was like, well, wait, how does this guy know, like what I encounter and, on a day-to-day basis. So it was just, so sometimes I think there are these moments that are fate too, where you're holding on to something and somebody somewhere that you don't expect comments and says something to you that, that changes your whole trajectory that day. Yeah.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
What do you think the biggest challenge we are facing right now, or roadblocks to supporting our communities, specifically with after school programs, is, specifically in a space that you work in? So like New York City, what kind of challenges are you guys facing in creating more opportunities to support more children with more types of events and more types of programs? What type of challenges are you guys facing?
I'm not sure I would place it as challenges as much as how do you interconnect all of the resources that are here? Because what I often find is that people want to engage and they want to help, but it's also how do you weave the web so that they can fit in and provide support and have a lasting relationship. Like we have a music industry program and our kids go to Republic Records, right? It's about building those relationships and partnerships that are out there. There'll always be things like, resources, financial resources and that kind of thing. But I tend to take these things from a community organizing lens. And I like to walk around in our neighborhoods and in our, in the city and so forth, and really use like a strength-based approach to, there's a lot here. How do we connect it? And I think that goes back to also the time in Louisiana, like the kids didn't have a soccer program. So we literally took, these fishermen took their nets and made soccer goals. Somebody else came out to build that. The moms did this whole food thing to raise money. And all of a sudden you see this being built, right? And when you're in a city like New York City, is the greatest city in the world, when, it's here. Like you just have to interconnect it and bring it to the kids. And I think that's what we're seeing with like our animation program. We've had Pixar, a gentleman from Pixar who did the short film Self come and talk to the staff. So they're doing animation and music industry. We have a book publishing company that the kids write and produce with professional authors. So I think it's about bringing people together. We have an award winning podcast that is in our second award since we last talked. We won the Davy Award. So we've won the Anthem Award and we've won the Davy Award 2 weeks ago. And we just recently won an architecture award for how our office is designed last night. And so I think that I think these things are important because I think when you're in the social service sector, you're not often given the resources to bring all these things to light. I think the pandemic allowed us to actually get more financial resources. And now, that's retracting. So, so for us to continue to do all these our educate innovation labs, we continue to need more resources to fund those. It wasn't as hard during the pandemic because money was being given to us because of the pandemic. So we were able to do a lot. So now we're kind of back to the same old. So
from a strategy perspective, how do you form some of these gigantic partnerships, right? We're talking about Pixar. We're talking about brands that people know, love, and experience on their own. So what is your strategy for going out and building this network of community to be able to expose so many of these children to these opportunities?
Yeah, so I just kind of ask, I know people want some rocket science thing. So I went to South by Southwest in Austin last year. And I went not to the I did go to the education component, but I went to the big component where there's Pixar and there's movie production. And I went up and asked people. I said, look, we're the largest provider of school-based after-school programming in the city of New York. We serve well over 100 schools, 30,000 kids. And in the Pixar situation, that team who did Self, it was about an Ethiopian girl. And the two creators talked about how they didn't know that they could have these careers growing up. So their story also was aligned with our kids. And so it was a very easy ask for them to say, look, would you come? Because would you come and talk to our staff? I have a distinguished speaker series too that I bring in for the staff and all of these folks. And I think our podcast, people have recommended people. We've had Grammy Award winners, we've had astronauts, we've had President Obama's ambassador to Switzerland. We're about to have the Undersecretary of Education. And these adults want to talk to kids. That's the easiest sell, is to say, look, I have these middle schoolers and they want to know your journey. And that's why the podcast is called Formative. But they ask really, and kids have no filter either. So they ask really poignant questions. And when I designed that, honestly, Keenan, it was for me to spend some time with kids to see how they were thinking. And the goal was, because we kind of co-host it, but I don't co-host anymore. The goal was, in my mind, for them to take it over, and they have. So I just come in and dub in now with because that's what you want. You want kids to drive these things. But we have to set up the infrastructure for it to happen for them. So we have, so it's exciting. It's really exciting. We beat out NBC and NPR, I don't know, on the Anthem Award. These kids, that's what I mean. We have such talent, and we have to cultivate that early, because when you decide to go to college or do something later in life, you'd be like, well, I have an award-winning podcast that I did when I was in 7th grade. What's better than that?
I think about not only the environment that you guys are creating for this next generation, but often you guys are inspiring them by showing them that these things are possible through proximity. There's a quote from Napoleon, I believe it is. It says, leaders are dealers in hope. When I think about the opportunity to sit across the table, if you will, from an astronaut or from anybody else, and they're actually in the flesh in front of you and shown how they've done the things that they've done, imagine how inspired these kids are, but also the changing of trajectory of their lives. It has to be amazing to be the person who's pulling all this together, Rachael. Do you ever get some time to reflect on your own accomplishments and inspiring the next generation?
Probably not. No. Yeah, I think we do. I think we do it. We do as a community.
I just mean you specifically.
Me specifically. Well, there's one thing I think I'd pause for a minute, because the one thing I was going to say is, I think often adults, when you were talking about the astronaut, when they say, when a kid says, I want to be an astronaut, and then typically adults say, well, stay in school and study hard, right? that's why formative is important, and why we're putting curriculum to it too, is that they also learn, well, what's the path? How do you actually become an astronaut? Like, if I really want to become an astronaut, what was his path? What did he study? So on and so forth. And so I think that's really the importance of this podcast, is because I think the exposure to all the jobs, kind of where we started out here, was, you're really learning, and all of the opportunities, but you're also learning that it's not a straight path, that nothing's easy, right? Because we often see people at the end of their careers or journeys when they've become X, Y, or Z, but we don't know what it took to get there. And I think that's what's really important. So going back, I think the reflection is always about, where are we? What else? How are the kids responding? We have a remarkable staff at New York Edge. I have 1,700 employees here, and directors and leaders in the field, from everybody, our senior staff to everybody who runs these programs on the ground. And so it's about cultivating a culture of learning and innovation. And so I think our reflection is, okay, wow. I think even for the adults, look what we just accomplished, right? Our book publishing company, I think we had 7 news outlets in New York City come out to that. And it was that, you're lucky if you get, so the Strand, but that was at the Strand, and the kids are giving a book talk at the Strand bookstore, and then they're signing the book. But what I love is that the other kids in the audience say, okay, well, can I do that? Like, when do I get to write a book? Because, I think we got to get away from worksheets and things that, we used to call drill and kill, is that, while repetition on certain things is good, again, it's creativity, it's curiosity, but it's also about having fun. Like, you got to wake up. Our arts programs, we have very large showcases where kids, they might have a step competition here with a couple hundreds of kids, and then they're going to Washington, D.C. to perform with a professional step troupe. Or the kids right now are in flag football, and there's a couple thousand kids in all the parks in New York City, and then they play the finals at the Jet Stadium. So there's always I have kids in tennis, right? So then they go over to the US Open, and they play with the professional coaches at the US Open. So we want them to see themselves, at Radio City Music Hall, because we've had kids compete at Radio City Music Hall. We've been national chess champions. And we also have other national programs. So I think we create that energy and that pathway for kids. So either, and also when it comes to sports, health and wellness, you may just do it for fun. Like, that may just be your sport or whatever the case may be. Or I might have the next Serena Williams in our program. I don't know, right? So, but we have to make it just not an activity, that there's some connectivity. They got to go to the U.S. Open, and they did. They were standing outside of Arthur Ashe Stadium, and and that flips something for kids to say, this is where you can be. Yeah.
The core memories, right? I often hear the stories of the athletes and the people who I look up to who have accomplished great things often go back to an early story in their life, or their life, where they're like, I had the opportunity to go stand outside of the US Open. I had an opportunity to go to Radio Musical. I had a chance to go here, and it changed everything. What do you think about your responsibility in casting a vision for the next generation of great leaders who are going to support the community? Now, when we think about this, like, there's so much competition for the youth to go into different spaces, like being influencers and things like that. But if they want to come work for an amazing organization like New York Edge, how are you thinking about casting that vision where they can find themselves being successful in what you guys do every single day?
Yeah, so what's great about us at New York Edge is we have a lot of, actually, our former students work here as well.
I believe it.
Yeah. And, so if they go off to college, they come back and they work for us in the summer. We have people that are full-time employees. But I do think it's important to think about this as a field as well. So we have an internship program with local high schools their interest is in STEM. So they teach STEM within our programs to younger kids as well. So we always see this kind of full circle going on within our community. And then we also see, we've had a young man named Kinshuk who went to Harvard on a full ride studying economics. And his first semester was during the pandemic. So I called him on the phone. We did a Zoom. And he looked like he hadn't left his room or showered in a while because he was studying. And I said, "Are you going outside and getting fresh air, right?" And at the time, he was a little concerned. The pandemic was going on. I said, "No, you can walk around." And then I said, "Well, how are you doing in school, right? For any freshman in their first year, it's tough." And he said, "Oh, Miss Rachel, I got an A minus." And I thought he said a C minus or something. But here he got all straight A's, but he was upset because he got an A minus. Now, this is a kid whose English skills didn't develop probably till 9th grade. And we would have to get him to leave the high school because he didn't have a computer in his home. Like, he'd stay there till 11 o'clock at night studying. And this is what I mean. We have these young people, at Syracuse University. They've gone up to summer program. I want them there. I don't want them just touring campus. I want them in these summer programs in 10th and 11th grade where they get college credit and they understand the rigors of college so that they're ready to go. Because I don't want them to go in but then not complete and feel supported in that process, particularly our first generation students, so that, they have the right supports in place going into the process and into school instead of waiting till it becomes stressful. And it's stressful for every kid, no matter who they are. So I think that's really important for us. Yeah.
Rachel, what do you want your legacy to be?
I think my legacy, I would love for it to be these young people continuing on with this work. And I think that my hope is that, anywhere I've been, to be able to work with a team, because it's not just me, it's an entire community. We can't always see the end result, but that there's a lot of young people out there that are just going to keep passing it forward and keep working hard and keep the journey and the social justice issues alive. So I think for me, you won't ever see your legacy, right? Because I think it's within these young people.
One of the traditions we have here, Rachel, as we kind of put the wheels down to land our episode, is our previous guest wanted to ask you a blind question. Okay. Now, our previous guest is an amazing leader who works in a child and youth program down in Georgia. And her question was, what is the one thing that people wouldn't know about you from your professional CV or your resume?
Well, okay. So probably 5 years ago, I was in a situation that was supposed to be a routine procedure, which ended up to me almost passing away. So it became this horrific nightmare of 10 surgeries and all kinds of things. So it was in that moment when I thought things were that would be the end, that if I was given the opportunity to keep going, and I had to really pull on my own resilience and my own, inner strength to sort of push myself through that, while still trying to, run an organization which has the same kind of emphasis as New York Edge does. So I think that's the one thing that people would not know, but I always kind of looked at it as, how do I get my mindset so that I can move sort of beyond this. Because I didn't, and when you're in it, I didn't actually realize how dire it was until I was through, because nobody actually told me at that moment. But that was a challenge. And I think there were a lot of promises that I made to myself at that time. And I think also at the time, my close friend who's also a teacher, had died of brain cancer. And I kept thinking, well, how do you get that news? And I'm in this position. Like, what did he mentally process to keep going forward in life? And so, while I've talked about all these people that fuel me and inspire me and keep me going in the work I do, that was a very defining moment that you will not ever see on my CV. Yeah. So I think it's a good question. I actually love that you do this at the end of the show.
It's a way for us to tie these episodes together, because we talk to so many leaders, right? And often the questions are more tactical, but when we can learn more about the person, and not to call name to the podcast, but their heart and hustle, it gives us a better understanding of who the people are who are leading these amazing organizations. And you definitely are the definition of heart and hustle. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. For everybody who's been tuning in, watching, and listening, it's been amazing to hear about your journey, the inspirations, your time in Southwest Louisiana, going into some of those stores and buying those Yankee hats as kind of your farewell gift to everybody in the South is an amazing opportunity for us to get to know you better. So Rachael, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.